Lucy had always known that an arranged marriage was the price of admission for being born into her family's tax bracket. It was a transaction pure and simple. But when given the catalog of eligible trust fund bachelors, she genuinely thought she had outsmarted the system. She bypassed the predictable lineup of arrogant billionaire CEOs, the ones currently chasing runaway models or buying yachts for actresses twice their age, and picked Andrew. He was a doctor, quiet, impeccably tailored, and possessed of a gentle, measured cadence that practically screamed stable human being. Lucy had foolishly assumed that a man who spent his days dealing with actual human suffering would possess at least a foundational grasp of basic empathy. She was wrong, spectacularly so. It took exactly 2 months of domestic life to realize Andrew wasn't the romantic lead of his own life. He was a walking, talking cliché. Specifically, he was that exhausted midnight summoned doctor friend from cheesy romance novels, the one whose entire existence is a plot device used to treat the main character's self-inflicted drama. Andrew didn't run a company, but he did run a 24/7 concierge service for a tight-knit circle of emotionally stunted man-children every time his golden boy buddy Gavin got dumped, threw a temper tantrum, or drank enough aged whiskey to give himself a mild stomachache. Andrew's phone would wail, and Andrew would dutifully play Saint Bernard to a pack of spoiled playboys. For a while, Lucy tolerated it with a deeply sarcastic internal monologue, but by their first wedding anniversary, her patience had officially expired. She had sat Andrew down the night before and given him explicit instructions: no phones, no favors, no exceptions. This anniversary was supposed to be a sanctuary. She spent the afternoon curating a spectacular 3-course dinner, tailoring every dish to his exact tastes, as she wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, watching him stir a rich rosemary sauce at the stove. A dangerous spark of warmth flared in her chest for a fleeting second. She let herself believe they were building a real home. Then, the phone rang, the sound cut through the kitchen like a physical blow. Lucy's stomach plummeted into a very familiar, Pavlovian dread. Andrew froze, his eyes darting toward the counter with a look of profound guilt already darkening his face. He answered it. On the other end, an assistant's voice crackled through the speaker, breathless and sounding like a Victorian orphan caught in a sudden, catastrophic panic. "Dr. Vance, please. You need to come right away. Gavin is doubled over in absolute agony." Before Andrew could even draw a breath to respond, Lucy crossed the kitchen floor. With a fluid, lethal calmness, she snatched the phone straight out of her husband's hand and brought it to her ear. "Is your finger broken?" Lucy said, her voice dripping with ice-cold venom. "Or are you physically unable to dial 911? If he is genuinely dying, take him to a hospital. If he is just pathetic, call his mother. Do not call my husband again." She ended the call with a sharp click and tossed the phone onto the marble counter, where it slid across the stone and hit the backsplash. Andrew looked torn, his brow furrowing as he reached for his jacket. "Lucy, please. I heard he actually fell hard for someone this time. It could be a real crisis." "I am shocked," Lucy interrupted, crossing her arms and letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Truly, a grown man's heartbreak turned out to be a medical emergency? Let me guess, his soul is bleeding? Medical science will never recover. He's my friend, Lucy. I have a duty. And what about your duty to your wife?" Lucy's voice dropped, sharpening into a razor-edged ultimatum that cut straight through the ambient hum of the kitchen. "Let me make this beautifully clear for you, Andrew. If you walk out that door tonight, don't bother looking for me in the waiting room when you get back. In fact, don't come back to this townhouse as my husband at all. If your precious friends are that desperate for your attention, go spend the rest of your life as a wealthy man's emotional support animal." Andrew looked at her, his jaw tightening. For a long, agonizing second, the butter in the pan hissed softly between them. The dining table behind them was beautifully set with candles, fresh flowers, and a stupid, handwritten menu Lucy had spent an hour making because she had briefly allowed herself to be romantic. Andrew swallowed hard, mumbled something completely incoherent about checking just in case, and began buttoning his coat anyway. He didn't slam the door when he left. He didn't storm out in a rage. He left gently, responsibly, with the quiet dignity of a good doctor rushing toward a crisis, and completely murdered his marriage on the way out to the elevator. The heavy thud of the front door closing echoed through the townhouse, followed by the faint, muffled chime of the elevator bell. Lucy didn't cry. She didn't sink to the floor, and she didn't fling the expensive crystal glasses against the wall. Instead, she stood perfectly still for 3 long heartbeats, watching the rosemary garlic sauce bubble and thicken to ruin on the stove. Then, with an eerie, lethal calmness, she rolled up her silk sleeves. She turned off the burner. She picked up the pan, walked over to the sink, and watched the gourmet sauce slide down the drain in one warm, wasted ribbon. Next went the perfectly seared steaks, flipped effortlessly into the trash can. Why preserve a dinner for a man who can't even preserve a boundary? She said aloud to the empty kitchen. Her voice didn't shake. It sounded hollow, crisp, and entirely final. She walked upstairs to the master bedroom and retrieved a single, sleek Rimowa suitcase from the closet. There was no dramatic sobbing into silk robes, no frantic throwing of garments into a pile. She packed with the cold, mechanical efficiency of a traveler checking out of a boutique hotel after realizing the room service was charming but fundamentally poisonous. Clothes, passport, laptop, charger. Practicality over sentiment. As she reached into the vanity drawer, her eyes fell on her hand. The massive, flawless diamond engagement ring caught the warm ambient light of the room. It was the ring Andrew's family had presented at their arranged engagement dinner, a sparkling symbol of a contract she had genuinely tried to turn into a home. Lucy pulled it off her finger without a shred of hesitation. Carrying her suitcase downstairs, she stopped by the dining table. The candles were burning low, casting flickering shadows over the pristine, untouched plates. She placed the diamond ring smack in the center of Andrew's empty plate. Beside it, she laid a crisp piece of heavy cardstock, scrawling a message in elegant, unwavering ink. I asked for one night as your wife. You chose another man's hangover. I'm removing myself from the rotation. She set her key on top of the note, grabbed her coat, and walked out before the townhouse could try to convince her it was still a home. By midnight, her family's private driver was dropping her off at a secluded luxury penthouse near the park, an estate kept strictly for emergency escapes from boring family functions. This, she decided, comfortably qualified. Meanwhile, across town, Andrew's Mercedes SUV practically flew into the secure parking garage of Gavin's multi-million-dollar downtown high-rise. He bolted up the private elevator, his medical bag gripped tightly in his fist, his heart hammering against his ribs with genuine panicked urgency. The penthouse door was opened by Gavin's assistant, who looked remarkably pale, though, in hindsight, it was less from medical trauma and more from the sheer stress of performing emergency theater. Andrew stormed into the cavernous living room. Where is he? What happened? He stopped dead in his tracks. Gavin was draped elegantly over a custom velvet sofa worth more than a family sedan. He had one hand pressed dramatically against his forehead like a tragic Victorian heroine. His designer shirt was half unbuttoned, and a half-empty bottle of 20-year-old single malt whiskey rested on the Italian glass coffee table beside him. There wasn't a drop of blood, a paramedic, or a piece of medical equipment in sight. Andrew stared at him, his medical bag suddenly feeling like a 50-pound anchor. Gavin, did you vomit blood? Are you hemorrhaging? Gavin lifted his head weakly, letting out a heavy, theatrical sigh. No, but Lena left me. Andrew, she called me emotionally immature and just walked out. My soul is bleeding. Andrew stood entirely frozen. The woody cologne he had sprayed for his anniversary dinner still clung to his collar. The shirt he wore was the same one he had hastily buttoned in his own kitchen while his wife practically begged him to stay. Your soul, Andrew repeated, his voice dangerously low. Yeah, Gavin groaned, reaching for his whiskey glass. Don't look at me like that. You're a doctor. Heartbreak causes actual physical chest tightness, you know. I needed you. In that exact moment, Andrew's stomach didn't just drop, it plummeted straight into his shoes. A cold, suffocating wave of reality crashed over him, tearing away the comfortable delusion he had lived in for the past year. Lucy was right. She had been 100%, flawlessly, devastatingly right. Gavin wasn't a patient in need of a physician. He was a spoiled child throwing a tantrum because he finally hit a boundary he couldn't buy his way out of. And Andrew was nothing more than his glorified enabler on call. He had traded his wife's dignity, his own anniversary, and the warmth of his home for this. Gavin, Andrew said, his voice terrifyingly quiet as he ripped the whiskey glass out of his friend's hand and slammed it onto the table. If heartbreak needed a private doctor, half this city would be in intensive care. If you're lonely, call a therapist. If you're drunk, call an Uber. Do not call me again. Before Gavin could even blink in offense, Andrew turned on his heel and sprinted out of the penthouse. He didn't care about speed limits on the drive back. He ignored his ringing phone as he dialed Lucy's number over and over, only for it to go straight to voicemail. He texted her frantically, "Lucy, where are you? You were right. I'm so sorry. I'm coming home." He burst through the front door of the townhouse just as the first pale light of dawn began to bleed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Lucy," he called out, his voice echoing loudly in the foyer. Silence greeted him. A heavy, suffocating, freezing silence that made his ears ring. Andrew walked slowly into the dining room. The candles had long since burned down to cold, hardened wax. There, under the dim morning light, he saw it. The glint of the diamond ring resting on the empty white porcelain, the key, and the note written in her sharp, unmistakable handwriting. He picked up the paper, his hand trembling as the brutal finality of her words sank in. There was no sarcastic thought filtering down from the staircase, no dry, witty commentary from the kitchen island, just an empty house that had gone entirely, permanently cold. By 9 o'clock the next morning, Andrew had managed to track her down. The Vance family resources were vast, but the elite social circle of their city was incredibly small. And Lucy hadn't exactly gone into hiding. She had simply upgraded her zip code to a place that didn't require her to share oxygen with him. When the doorman called up to the penthouse, Lucy considered telling him to throw Andrew into the street. Instead, she took a slow sip of her espresso, adjusted the lapels of her pristine cream silk robe, and decided that a quick surgical strike was far more efficient than hiding like a fugitive inside her own inheritance. She opened the heavy mahogany door just wide enough to lean comfortably against the frame. Blocking the entryway, Andrew looked like a walking corpse. The quiet elegance he usually wore like armor had completely evaporated. His charcoal coat was crumpled and damp from the morning drizzle, his hair was messy, and his eyes were bloodshot and hollowed out from a completely sleepless night. He looked pathetic. Lucy, on the other hand, looked effortlessly stunning, entirely rested, and profoundly unimpressed. "Lucy, please," Andrew begged before she could even say a word. He stepped forward, his voice cracking with a desperation she had never heard from him before. "Gavin wasn't actually dying. I know I messed up. I realized it the second I got there." "I'm shocked," Lucy interrupted, her voice dripping with an ice-cold, theatrical sarcasm that cut him off mid-sentence. "Truly, Andrew." A grown man's terminal stomachache turned out to be nothing more than a bruised ego. "Quick. Write a paper on it. Medical science will never recover from this staggering breakthrough." Andrew flinched as if he had been physically struck. "Lucy, please. Let me come in. I just want to explain. I promise I won't touch you. I just need you to listen to me." "Good, because you shouldn't touch me with the hands you keep lending out to every rich idiot who treats our marriage like a free clinic," she snapped. She crossed her arms, her gaze boring into him with absolute finality. "It wasn't like that," he stammered, his hands hovering helplessly in the air between them. "I thought it was a real emergency. I'm a doctor. I'm conditioned to. You're conditioned to be a golden retriever for trust fund playboys," she corrected smoothly. "Let's call a spade, St. Andrew. You thought because you always came back before dawn, the leaving didn't count. You convinced yourself you were out there saving lives, but the truth is much uglier. You just liked being needed. You liked the ego stroke of being the indispensable savior to a group of functional toddlers." Andrew closed his eyes, his shoulders dropping as the sheer weight of her words landed. He had no defense, because there wasn't one left to make. "Well, congratulations," Lucy continued, a sharp, mocking smile playing on her lips. "Your schedule is officially wide open. You are free to be needed by the entire country club now. I've already called my attorney. I've filed for divorce." Andrew's eyes snapped open, panic washing over his face. "Divorce? Lucy, no, we can talk about this. We can't fix a deficit of common sense, Andrew. Have a wonderful shift." Before he could utter a single syllable of defense, Lucy stepped back and shut the heavy door firmly in his face. The click of the deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest sound Andrew had ever heard, leaving him standing entirely alone in the sterile, silent hallway. Lucy had no intention of slipping away quietly into the night like a disgraced Gothic heroine. If her marriage was going to burn, she was going to use the ashes as a smoky eye. Exactly 1 week later, the city's high-profile charity medical gala commenced. It was the premier event of the season, hosted by Andrew's very own research foundation and packed to the rafters with their entire glittering, toxic social circle. When the double doors of the grand ballroom opened, Lucy made her entrance. She was wearing a jaw-dropping, liquid silver gown that caught every shard of chandelier light. And her left ring finger was completely conspicuously bare. The room noticed, Andrew noticed first, standing near the donor wall. His breath caught so sharply his sentence died midair. But before Andrew could even make a move toward her, Gavin appeared. Completely oblivious to his own impending doom, Gavin strolled up to Lucy with the unearned, Teflon confidence of a man who had never been publicly corrected in his entire life. He gave her a patronizing, smug smile. "Lucy, come on," Gavin whispered, swirling a glass of scotch. "Are you seriously still mad about last week? Cut the guy some slack. Doctors save lives." Lucy didn't blink. She smoothly plucked a flute of vintage champagne from a passing waiter's tray, took a slow sip, and eyed Gavin up and down with the clinical detachment of a scientist inspecting a particularly boring insect. Then she spoke. She didn't yell, but she used her crystal-clear, high-society diction, ensuring her voice carried effortlessly over the ambient string quartet and straight to the surrounding crowd. "Calling an Ivy League physician in the middle of the night because you have a bad case of consequences is not saving lives, Gavin," Lucy said, her tone dripping with casual malice. "It's an adult diaper change." A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the immediate circle of guests. Gavin's smug smile instantly froze, his face flushing a violent, humiliated crimson. "Lucy, that's incredibly low," Gavin started, his voice tightening. But he never got to finish. Right on cue, the massive, state-of-the-art projector screens behind the main ballroom stage suddenly flickered, the elegant logo of the Medical Foundation faded away. In its place, a crisp, bold title slid into view. Dominating the entire room, "The Midnight Calls, a case study in rich men's delusions." The ballroom fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Lucy had put her bachelor's degree in data analysis to spectacular use. The screen shifted to display a flawless, chronological timeline of her entire marriage. It detailed every single personal milestone Andrew had abandoned. Side by side with the reality of the situation, night 1 of marriage, claim severe abdominal distress, reality, alcohol-induced ulcer symptoms after a frat boy bender, private ambulance available, hospital 5 minutes away, wife's birthday dinner, claimed emergency poisoning concern, reality, 3 bottles of expensive champagne mixed with poor judgment, first wedding anniversary, claimed urgent life-threatening medical crisis, reality, Gavin got dumped by his girlfriend and wanted a shoulder to cry on. But the absolute piece de resistance was the final slide. Lucy had obtained forwarded group chat screenshots from a disgruntled wife in their circle, there, projected in giant high-definition text for the entire high society board of directors to see. Was a message from Gavin. "Just tell him it's an upper abdominal crisis. Doctor Vance ignores minor things now. Send flowers to Lucy later. It always works on wives." The ballroom erupted into a hornet's nest of furious whispers and sharp, disgusted murmurs. High-profile donors and hospital board members turned on Gavin and his tight-knit circle with absolute disdain. A prominent donor's wife looked at her own husband, realization dawning on her face. "You told me you were at a hospital with Andrew that night," she hissed, walking away before he could answer. Gavin stood paralyzed under the glaring light of his own leaked texts. Lena, the girlfriend who had recently taken him back, stared at the screen, then at Gavin. With total disgust, she untied a diamond tennis bracelet Gavin had bought her that morning, dropped it straight into his scotch glass with a heavy clink, and walked out of the ballroom without looking back. In the center of the chaos stood Andrew. He was completely frozen, the microphone for his upcoming research speech still heavy in his hand. He looked at the screen, watching his entire professional reputation, his integrity, and his name be meticulously dismantled in a matter of seconds. Then he looked across the crowded room at Lucy. For the past year, he had assumed she would always be sitting at the table, waiting for him to finish saving the world's richest idiots. Looking at her now, standing under the chandelier light with her champagne raised in a silent, mocking toast, he finally realized the truth. She hadn't just left him, she had entirely erased the waiting room. The humid night air of the terrace did little to cool the absolute dumpster fire raging inside the ballroom, but it provided exactly the backdrop Lucy wanted. She stood near the stone balustrade, sipping her champagne and watching the city lights twinkle with absolute, unbothered serenity. The heavy glass doors slid open behind her, Andrew stumbled out onto the terrace, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. The cool wind whipped at his collar. But he didn't seem to notice. He looked entirely undone, stripped of the quiet, pristine elegance that had defined him for the last year. Without a single word, Andrew reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his ringing smartphone, and hurled it forcefully into the center of a nearby decorative marble fountain. It hit the water with a sharp splash and sank to the bottom, its glowing screen dying beneath the ripples. "I blocked them all," Andrew said, his voice shaking with a desperate, ragged intensity. He took 2 steps toward her, then stopped himself, his hands trembling at his sides. "I just handed my resignation to the board of directors. I'm stepping down from the foundation. I've already called a therapist, Lucy. I mean it. I will do whatever it takes to earn a second chance. I'll change everything. We can start from scratch." Lucy didn't flinch. She slowly turned around, leaning her hips against the stone railing. The wind caught the liquid silver of her dress and sent strands of her hair dancing across her face. She looked at him with a devastating blend of mild pity and absolute, total detachment. "I'm glad you finally grew a spine, Andrew," she said, a faint, mocking smile playing on her lips as she tilted her head. "Really, it's a great look on you. You should have tried it a year ago." "Lucy, please, I'm begging you. But let me make something entirely clear," she interrupted, her voice dropping into a smooth, unshakable rhythm. "I am a wife, Andrew, not a rehabilitation center for emotionally stunted husbands. I am not a gold star you get to earn back once you finally learn how to function like an adult. I asked for a partner and you gave me a pager. I still love you," he whispered. The words were completely broken, torn from a throat tight with unshed tears. He looked at her as if she were the only life raft in an ocean of his own making. "Please, I love you." "I know," Lucy replied smoothly. She didn't offer a dramatic sigh or a bitter tear. She simply set her empty champagne flute down on the stone railing and adjusted the elegant drape of her silver coat over her shoulders. "But love doesn't turn off just because dignity finally wakes up. I can love you and still recognize that you are entirely bad for my peace of mind." She took a single step past him, her perfume catching the breeze. She paused just beside his shoulder, not looking at him, but letting her words rest heavy in the night air. "I genuinely hope your next wife enjoys the boundaries I had to bleed for. Have a nice life, Doc." She turned on her heel and walked away. The glass doors slid open for her and closed behind her, cutting off the ambient noise of the gala and leaving nothing but the quiet hum of the city below. Andrew stood entirely alone under the harsh glare of the terrace lights. He looked at the dark fountain where his phone rested, then down at the empty walkway where Lucy had gone. He was left with a spotless medical career, a quiet phone, and the agonizing, permanent realization that he had finally learned how to be a husband entirely too late. The Immoral Affairs Bureau is legally required to condemn civilian Lucy for committing first-degree romance trope homicide. While public execution by PowerPoint remains highly illegal, we admit watching an entire city's billionaires collapse into emotional bankruptcy was excellent for staff morale. To avoid becoming the next victim of a woman in a silver gown with a presentation remote, please like and subscribe. It's mandatory bureau compliance.